Looks like we may be on the air. Let us get our little light bulb clickety clack analog intro going for our evolution hour. Actually, beginning before midnight for a change. Ta da! In our ongoing year of doom. And remember, WordPress.com, links in every single video. All that stuff is freebie, share away. It's there for the taking to annoy or enlighten your assorted friends and acquaintances out in the big world. So here we are, continuing with our exciting little world of the books of Duane Gish. The paired works from 1978 to 1995, the revision. Oh, hi, Lisa. That are tracking kind of the really golden oldie world of creationism before the internet. And it's not quite the same creationism that exists today. It's one of the reasons why Duane Gish and Henry Morris and others are treated as venerable figures in the movement, but they're not always cited much anymore because there's been transformations, as we will be encountering as we plow through this mess, that are markedly different. For Volume 2, Rocks Were There, in fact, one of the major issues that differentiates contemporary creationism from the 1970s, 80s, 90s version is that modern creationism pretty much accepts plate tectonics in a way that Henry Morris, Duane Gish era didn't. They rejected it quite adamantly, and therefore it meant that they were envisaging the world as we see it, continents exactly as we know. They could have mountain ranges plowing up and down. In fact, it was pretty clear pretty on that they had to have the mountain ranges pulled down so that the water could slosh up high enough to cover all of the earth. Needless to say, that's been a bit of a problem. But trying to relate all of that to the supercontinents previous to that, as we will be going into in the new book, is just a chaotic mess. But anyway, this episode, Gish is still in his introductory chapter, and he's still in a bunch of authority quote modes. Hi, Purple. And the fun part is when I can find stuff so that you can follow along in the original primary sources, because a lot of this stuff is really old. Some of it was pretty old even when Gish was trotting it out, but we're even farther removed from it. Anyway, Paul Ehrlich and a co-author, Holm, did a piece in Science in 1962, and I'll be able to put the link up to that one. It's being used just as an authority quote by Gish, nicking a little bit right at the tail end, relating to, I thought there were more hydroplate theory. Yeah. Well, the hydroplate theory stuff, that's Walt Brown. And right off the bat, I'm not really thinking that Gish and Morris were overly enthusiastic about hydroplate. And in fact, relatively quickly, as again we'll be documenting in the new book, hydroplates got dumped on quite a bit. The current pseudoscience geology of du jour is catastrophic plate tectonics, which is a bit different than the slippy slide plates. They're basically speeding up the plate movements in CPT. And it's Steve Austin's little baby. It's still being promoted as a central feature. It has had no impact whatsoever in the regular sciences. Going to have the mountains of water to cover the mountains of rocks. Yeah. Well, that's really a major bit with the whole flood geology is that there ain't enough water, even with the hypothetical fountains of the deep. So you have to remember that the flood occurs, all this water squirts up, it covers the earth, drowns everything, and disappears, leaving the existing oceans. So they don't really think about there being vast reservoirs underneath things, or that it's being thrown off into space, although a few weird ideas have occasionally popped out in that mode. But pretty much they were just thinking of kind of redistributing things such that we end up with the amount of water that we have in the present oceans. So the difficulty of trying to go over Everest was immediately seen as a problem, and creationists have backpedaled on that. You could lower it down to Mount Ararat, but even there, as we'll be quoting in the book. Andrew Snelling is accepting conventional geology about the relative recentness of Mount Ararat. So it's arguing that Ararat wasn't there at the time of the flood. So the ark could not have landed on Mount Ararat, Agradagi, which is the official name of the place. So that's a more example of how creationism moves along. And depending upon which creationists they're drawing on, asking people questions about where did the ark land and all of that, which name they give will give you a sense about where they fall on that timeline of evolving creationism. Yes, where would it disappear? It didn't think of that. Yes, indeed. Water comes in, you have the drainage system, but where the hell does it go? To me, the volume of water is the least of their concerns because it relates far more catastrophically to try to figure out how do mountain ranges up and down, what was going on with supercontinents. In fact, just in the last few days, I've been working on the section for the new book about how Tim Clary at the Institute for Creation Research, which would be the bunch that Gish and that were hovering at, their position is that the Pangaea supercontinent was the pre-flood world. Move over to Answers in Genesis, they've gone whole hog, and they treat it as Rodinia, which then turns into Pangaea during or recently after the flood, and then into the occurrence system. And Clary, with rather considerable understatement, is saying that by restricting their model to Pangaea, they're cutting down the tectonic difficulties of moving from Rodinia into Pangaea and then beyond. But it's still a mess one way or the other. So it's an intriguing thing. And even at that, though, the maps and presentations of what the pre-flood world looked like are so generically vague, it's practically useless. The map of Middle Earth in Lord of the Rings is radically more Cimmeria, the world of Conan the Barbarian. The maps in there are vastly more detailed than what you're getting in the Andrew Snelling, Tim Clary, Ord bit. They have kind of like a vague cartoon for the Pangaea superworld, but nothing in the way of detail breakdown, which, of course, when you jump over to the real science literature, suddenly you're seeing plate boundaries and the little things to indicate which is subducting under what and all of that. And the level of detail that's going on in real geology is like 8,000 miles removed from what's going on in creationism. So in terms of the generic blither, creationists sound like they're writing in 1930. It's just really generic, straightforward fan fiction pseudogeology. Anyway, back to our tracking down our little fat pals with Dwayne Gish. One that I was unable to get a bit onto was a New Scientist letter from an R. Danson, unquote, grumping against evolution. The interesting thing about Gish rather smugly just says, as Danson says, who the hell is Danson? Well, whereas in the previous episode, I tracked down who the hell is referring to, I have no idea who this R. Danson was. It's most probably just a simple letter or brief comment, but New Scientist doesn't have archives going back that far to 1971, so we have no idea. I can say, however, that the volume number is wrong. Gish gives it as number 49, but as you can do when you can check in at least the theoretical structure of where their archives are, that ain't 1971. So the volume number is wrong and the content is uncheckable. I can't find any indication of it online to be able to do a reference to it. If somebody else has any hard copy or material on this, let me know. But at any rate, Danson is just a cipher. He's not, the name doesn't pop up in what's his name's book on creationism that catalogs practically everybody up and down the, oh God, the guy starts with an N. That's the name suddenly has escaped me at the moment. Anyway, Gish then jumps into a name that for people familiar with old style creationism jumps right out, Pierre Grasset, which is also in with a little declension mark that I won't be typing in. But anyway, he gets channeled really quite a bit. French non-Darwinian evolutionist, There's a 1973 book that's being trawled, and although I think the content on this material is most probably being drawn primarily from Dobzhansky's 1975 review of it, which I will be able to put a link up to, so you'll be able to read Dobzhansky, which is really fun because Gish, who was just summarizing kind of the Grasse has a dislike for the Darwinian style of evolution. Dobzhansky went into considerable detail explaining what exactly was wrong with Grasse's book, and none of that was entering into Gish's treatment of it. Grasse also pops up in a 1979 ICR post from William Bauer, where he does kind of bump into some of his content. I suspect he was a Lamarckian, yeah. That French viewpoints of that standard natural selection view of nature was not a big thing in French evolutionism generally, and it was also the case for American evolutionists who tended to be neo-Lamarckians. But without being able to actually see Grasse's book, it's available theoretically in a translation, but I wasn't able to find it anywhere on archive.org. So it would be fun to kind of see what the hell was going on in the matter. The guy lived from 1895 to 1985. So he lived well into past Gish's first book. But that level of authority quoting, he's just a trope, and he still pops up in authority quotes. I think there were quite a few Grasse quotes that got nicked in what's his name's multi-volume creationism book. Also named suddenly escaping me at the moment. Brain fart. It's been mowed lawn today and did way too much walking and exercise and that. So I'm operating in brain dead mode at the moment. At any rate, the Bauer, which you'll be able to get kind of a little cross section, killer for Noah's flood and layers of salt. Oh yeah, we made a big deal about discussing the Mycenaean salinity crisis in the Mediterranean in volume 1 of Rocks Were There, because it fits in directly to the whole issue about how the Grand Canyon forms. Because what happens is that in any context, when you have water coming into an area, well, this one would be the into, and it's coming out down here, if the differential between this and this increases faster than the water can erode it, it will produce V-shaped incised canyons. And you can do that by raising the input water, as was happening in the Colorado Plateau, pushing all of that up ultimately generates a Grand Canyon. Meanwhile, the Mycenaean salinity crisis dropped the water level. And as we pointed out in the book, there is a ginormous Grand Canyon-sized canyon underneath the current Nile River, which was a big canyon trench that went down to the now way lower Mediterranean Sea, and there were little like salt lakes and craps all around there. Not only that, several rivers coming out of France were doing exactly the same trick, and even way up because of the drainage system on the Volga River in Russia was generating these canyons. Eventually, the Mediterranean Sea refilled, the water level went up, so you had a monstrous estuary where the modern Nile River would be. And then in the millions of years since, that's all got filled in with sediment. And that's the river the pyramids are built on. So we had a lot of references to that in volume 1 of Rocks Were There. So the Mycenaean salinity crisis, which papers appear on that all the time. We put quite a lot of those citations on that in the book, and people continue to do research on it down to this very day. By and large, creationists have been very wary of stepping into the salinity crisis. As we noted in the book, there's kind of like just glancing references to it, which is another good reason. Buy the book. It has all that references and material in that. At any rate, part 2 relates to a delightful accident where a friend of mine happened to have from his old personal library one of the A Beka creation textbooks, Biology, God's Living Creation from 1998. And I had a chance to borrow the thing and look through it a bit, and it was just delicious. It was fun watching how creationists being manipulative pseudo-scholars has been a very long tradition, and A Beka is certainly following into that. They had a little section on scientists on evolution. It was on page 357, which consisted of 6 little quote snippets attributed to names, none of which were given as to dates or the original source it was from. Just scientists says this, blah, blah, blah. So that meant it might be a hurdle to find out what the hell you were going to find out where they were from. They were all very ancient names. These are people that I had to check up, only one of whom I really recognized. The racialist anthropologist Ernest Hooton, 1887, died in 1954. He was quoted as saying, quote, "Just how fins developed into limbs is still a mystery, but they did," unquote, because Hooton was an evolutionist, just a racist one. This 1988 book was particularly ironic to be trotting out this little quote from the times past, because this was when evo-devo was really diving into homeobox genes, and that was going to ultimately account for how fins and limbs develop. Vast technical literature on that subject. I refer you to Neil Shubin's Your Inner Fish, which went into that in considerable details. I was, however, able to track down a couple of the quotes actually to primary source. And we'll be giving you some links on that because thank heavens, archive.org, great help. So one of them was a little bit on, quote, "The real origin of horses is unknown," unquote. And that this was according to Tracy Storer, born 1889, died 1963. And it turned out to be from his 1943 book on general zoology. So here was A Beka in 1988 trawling a little authority quote bit from a book that was 40 years old, came out at the time of World War II. It was just ridiculously ancient. Now, it turns out that the sentence involved was clearly alluding to the base of the lineage for hippus, as they went to great detail in that chapter describing the various fossil horses that was after that. So what they were saying about the origin of horses unknown had to do with the very deep root prior to Eohippus, which was already in the evolutionary sequence leading into horses. So this was, even for 1943, a stretch to make hay out of that in 1988, because the text was quite clear about the context that they were discussing on. So I would classify that as misrepresenting the primary source, let alone, as of 1988, it's just an obsolete reference to bring up. I mean, excuse me, we were way beyond that. We didn't need to rely on something from 3. The other one's equally fun. The geological record has so far provided no evidence as to the origin of fishes, ... Oh, how I love ellipses in a text. And it is attributed to a, quote, R.J. Norman, unquote, which I couldn't find there was ever a person as that being a fish paleontologist. However, there is a J.R. Norman, 1898 to 1944, who wrote a history of fishes in 1931. Ta-da! Archive.org has a thing. So it turns out that this thing occurs on page 344 of that book. But again, as with the horse one, it was a lead-in to 18 pages on the fossil fish evolution that we do have. Worse, the way earlier Cambrian basal vertebrates, filling in lots of holes in their origin, were coming on the scene by the 1960s. So long before A Beka in 1931 for authority quote. I find all of this quite an intriguing issue of how evasive and creationists are by their very nature. If all they're doing is going for gotcha quotes, they can't help but misrepresent the source material. And given the fact that in these particular instances, available that they could have gotten a better job on it. I mean, if they want to try to make this kind of an argument based on the actual science of the time they're writing, that's fine and dandy. Good luck to them. But they weren't even doing that. And so there are all these little boxes sprinkled through the books of all of these little authority quote gotcha things where you have no way, the poor student, it would be physically impossible in 1988 for anybody to have tracked down where these things were, because the internet wasn't existing. And in many cases, how are they going to find R.J. Norman, who isn't a real person? Oh, you get the same thing as Gibraltar between Sicily and North Africa, in addition to the Dardanelles Straits. Yeah, the whole geology of all of these changes in dynamics over time and the details of things. What I've discovered in researching creationist apologetics on geology is the more they bring up specific areas, the more primed you should be to just look up and find out what it is. If the creationist neglects to provide science documentation on the particular point, they're just riffing off of their memory or some general science accounting of something. That's a dead giveaway, a flag. Found over and over and over again, Taz Walker, Michael Ord, Tim Clary, and these others, they'll be bringing up subject matter. And if they mention the specific geological deposit or mountain range or river sequence, you need to want to track down what the technical material is on it. And odds are you'll probably find some stuff. And you can cross-check it against their creationist account to see whether or not they bothered to check anything on it, because odds are that they will not do so. If they do go to the rigmarole of citing material, I've spotted this again, and we'll be documenting examples after examples of it regarding Michael Ord and Tim Clary. They're misrepresenting the source material. So we're going to be dealing with some really fun stuff about Tim Clary's cold slab argument that percolates around kind of the edges. Standing for Truth and Nephilim Free have kind of ripped off of it. Doesn't seem to be too widely promulgated outside of Clary's ICR club, but clearly he's just misrepresenting the source material about these deep mantle slabs and why they are cooler than their surrounding circumstances, when the papers he himself was aware of indicated what the situation was. And he mentions absolutely nothing whatsoever about it. So it's going to be discussed in more of our little info boxes in Rocks Were There Volume 2, all in conjunction to the grand walk through the Grand Canyon, the various rock formations, talking about the actual paleontology, the paleoecology of all of these little areas, plus the really hot stuff material formation of the canyon itself, which has interconnections with vast drainage systems that are connecting all the way up to Canada, where rivers sometimes are going north and south versus east and west. And the Colorado River is like a late player in the game in this area. And there's been a huge amount of paleontology or geology on this stuff in the years since then. And it's almost completely ignored by creationists in this area. So it's from a scholar's point of view, it's an absolute gold mine of stuff. Anyway, you'll be able to look through Norman, J.R. Norman's History of Fishes to see what the state of the art was in 1931. And of course, in terms of what they couldn't possibly know about the genetic structure of how fins and that come about, and what's going on in the development of swim bladders and all of that material that are in the decades, many decades since. And that poor A Beka, anybody that was raised on the A Beka textbooks is getting cheated, because there was material, way too much material available, where all A Beka can do is just trawl stuff, sections on great creation scientists of the past that was just a crib from Henry Morris. They were riffing off of Harry Rimmer, who was a inaccurate flake, kind of like a Henry Morris light that was figuring in creationism of 50s and 60s era. It was just really gruesomely old-fashioned stuff. In the same way, the same principles going on with Will Duffy. For those of you watching Erica Gutzik-Gibbons' ongoing attempt to educate Will Duffy on, who's a creationist, on evolution data. They've been doing material on the whales. The latest episode is on birds, and holy smokes, poor Will, when he gets into the hominids, this is Erica's bread and butter. I think his poor brain is going to dissolve. But at any rate, Duffy went to the point of trying to respond to Erica's previous segment on whales by doing authority trawling. He goes to Carl Werner, who is the Luther Sutherland of modern creationism, who goes around getting little gotcha video clips from scientists admitting all of these things, which it turns out, no, they're not. they're misrepresenting the material and simply snippeting in the same way that Ray Comfort does. And the point is that I don't think Will Duffy ever thought to look the gift horse in the mouth and to cross-check whether or not what he was being fed by Werner was in fact accurate. Well, bless her heart, Duffy has uncovered the fact that Erica is way, if anything, way more familiar with Carl Werner's crap than I am. She has 3 of his books, and she has been nursing the prospect of going after Werner on details because of how she's incensed about how he misrepresents the material on hominid evolution, and is probably going to be doing a major analysis of that in due course in there. So that may come up, will probably be inserted into her discussion when she gets down into that stuff. She's going to be devoting quite a few. They're doing an episode every month. There's going to be at least 3 months or so that's devoted to this because it's a mammoth subject and it's her area, it's her wheelhouse. So it's a delightful bit. I'm always encountering some technical papers and background work. A lot of this stuff that pops up in her discussions where I'm going, ooh, I didn't know about that one. Yeah, let's stick that in the reference bibliography. So it's going to be really fun. Oh, attended Fog Zone at 7th and 8th grades, and they told me evolutionists believe Lamarckian evolution. Yeah, in a way, they could be kind of fairly representing elements of things, because a lot of the evolutionists that they would have been going after and complaining about, especially if they were American evolutionists were busy in 1920, a lot of that would be true. But all of them just pretty much went extinct in the post-war period as the new neo-Darwinian synthesis that Simpson and Dobzhansky and Haldane and all the others were putting together, Fisher, Wright, and all of that in the 1920s and 1930s, that now provided a genetic underpinning for evolution, and all of which they could do despite the fact that they hadn't worked out DNA yet. And Zach Hancock, in fact, has gone into one of his recent lectures going into, and I put a link up to that a couple of weeks back, that explains in great detail what was going on as to why that neo-Darwinian synthesis was able to make so many observations about how gene systems work without actually knowing the nuts and bolts of what genes were, that they were DNA. And that even not knowing that, the structures and mathematical relationships and probability arguments that could be discerned just at the chromosome gene level still hold true, and that it functions independent of knowing the little nuts and bolts wiggling at the mutation point level, which can have effects on things, certainly, but yet it doesn't obviate all of that higher level stuff. The neo-Lamarckians were never able to get to that stage. Too many experiments were being done in the 20s and 30s that was just blowing any kind of inheritance of acquired characteristics apart, and it was becoming increasingly untenable, in the same way that Piltdown, as a transitional fossil, started to look less and less probable as found more and more fossils. But a lot of work in that was suspended because of World War II. Some of the fossils that would have been relevant to look at apart during the war, they lost some of the Peking man stuff during the war. The ship got sunk, as I recall. And so it really wasn't until after World War II that things started picking up again. And now they had new tools to deal with, and they eventually, by the time we moved down into the 60s and 70s, now that we can look at exact DNA, it's changing the way we look at stuff. And cladistic systematics is another point about looking at things. Yeah, the Bob Jones thing, our condolences to you. You would have gotten, Bob Jones has their own set of pseudoscience books. I've got a couple of them in my library. They're just as jiggery pokery as the A Beka stuff. They touch upon kind of chemistry and physics kind of stuff, okay, because that doesn't bear directly upon the creationism issue. But biology, systematics, paleontology, there's just layer on layer of things that they can only go so far with. And depending on the publication date of the book, you would be finding that they're much farther behind the data curve than secular school science texts, which tend to be a bit behind the data curve. So the textbooks that I would have been having in the 1960s and 70s, these were basically drawing upon kind of the science data that's mid to late 1950s, maybe early 1960s at the moment, that wasn't quite good enough. But we were about to move into just a tidal wave of transitions as we start getting into the plate tectonics revolution and Big Bang cosmology in the astronomy ends of things, the radical expansion of our genetic understanding with homeobox genes in the 80s and 90s. And most of the major fossil transition series that we have with whales and bird evolution and fine-tuning material on the reptile mammal transition, but certainly with birds and whales, that's coming along since the 1990s, which means after Duane Gish's book and well after that A Beka book in the 1980s. So poor little kids, poor little creationists, don't you realize the tidal wave of science that's about to be done? And that train has moved forward and it has not stopped since. And so the most you can say about anti-evolutionism is that it's getting farther and farther behind the data curve, and they're never going to catch up. They're certainly never going to develop a model that will be able to account for all of it in any way that's coherent. They've had decades to work with. Doesn't matter whether they're in the intelligent design wing or the reasons to believe old Earth creationists or the young Earth creationists wing. They still think they've got kind of a science agenda. Young Earth creationists in particular are arguing, they put up their little research programs and rate and all the rest, which cute. It's kind of like fan fiction science, but it's not made any headway whatsoever in the regular sciences for good reason, because it doesn't actually explain anything. It doesn't get anywhere. Doesn't mean that a few creationists don't still publish in regular science departments. Lyle and company and will still be popping up. There's few intelligent designers that actually still kind of publish in regular science literature material, but wow, it's never going to be able to hit more than just wheel spinning apologetics. So that's one of the reasons why people like the Discovery Institute and the gang at AIG and the like are so keen on YouTube videos and that kind of stuff. They do have their in-house journals. The Intelligent Design Movement one is pretty moribund. You still have the various creationist journals that are aimed at their own audience that are technical in that they've got footnote references. And that's what at least I love to see for source methods analysis, because give me a bibliography and I can start burrowing into it and see whether or not they're representing things fairly. And la-di-da, turns out not. So yeah, Bob Jones University, even there's been a little bit of scrubbing. There's older posts that I've got from some of the teachers at Bob Jones that were on their website that they maintained actively, but they would have positions on various evolution issues. Poof, pretty much gone from their place now. So there's, I think, a great deal of hunkering down. How much of this is available in courses at their college level is another matter, but it's not stuff that's available open for inspection on the websites, which is not helping. Hovind still says he thinks the reason for redshift is God stretching out the heavens. Yeah, the heavens stretching thing, there'll also be a little section on it in the new book, because creationists, including Reasons to Believe crowd, kind of play off of that stretching the heavens analogy in a way to try to get around the day 4 problem. We're going to have a big section on that little puppy, because that's one that just blows to smithereens both young Earth creationism and old Earth creationism. And it's just fascinating the headstands that people go on this, but we'll be cataloging the players and what rationalizations they do. To be fair, there are fewer rationalizations available for an old Earth creationist than there are for the young Earth creationists, who play around with rearranging how space and time are put together and have a lot of fun. None of it's terribly convincing, even within their own camp. You've got creationists who, when they look over this stuff, are kind of scratching their heads because they have to constantly jump to a new rock, as the previous explanation that somebody puts up doesn't really flip well. So there's been an ongoing evolution in this area, but not a good evolution, in that it never actually lands anywhere. So I'd put them farther out on the fringe in terms of explanatory power than people working around with string theory in modern astrophysics, that at least they've got a little bit more technical expertise. What they lack is kind of an experimental verification for it. Well, the young Earth creationists are in the same boat, and it's a lot of deck chair maneuvering. So we'll be cataloging a lot of that material to get all of that up to speed, so that anybody that comes afterwards, I'm quite proud of the cosmology chapters, which we had to split into 2 chapters because there was so much material involved. Because there's really never been a good enough catalog and of where their positions are. Generally speaking, astrophysicists just don't pay any attention to creationism. And so you get a few little blogs here and there, a few little YouTube videos here and there, but it's not dealt with in quite the same way that paleontologists and biologists have gone after creationists with fairly extensive criticisms. So yeah, space and time are related. No, he didn't. Yeah, it's a real fun one, because of course any attempt to fiddle around with c, the speed of light, affects everything in that E=mc² thing. And there's an awful lot of amazing stuff. The infinite speed of light that's occasionally appealed to, and the idea that the rest of the universe is old, but just the kind of little bubble that we're in is much younger. I mean, it's just ad hoc. It's hilarious stuff. It's bad fiction, and even less effective as science. So what can I say? Anyway, it's going to be a cute little book for everybody to go through to give references on that stuff. Once I finish the Grand Canyon segment, then we move into putting in the references and adjustments that Jackson did on the cosmology chapter. Then it's off to the Ark Encounters kind list, the first of its kind anywhere for everybody to examine, and then the human evolution chapter that Jackson is in the process of writing. So we're starting to see the darkness at the end of the tunnel on this monster. Whether or not the font size on the bibliography is going to be really tiny, even smaller than the first book, we'll find out once I get the full page count. So we'll get to see on all of that. So let us put our little thank you note here for our people who have been helping us in the process of our operation here. Thanks to friend Peter, who's working on the Politique game doodad. He gave me a little gift. He had to get a new wireless mouse, and he bought 2 and gave me 1. So, boop, I got a wireless mouse again for the laptop. So, thank you all of our patrons, colleagues, researchers, sisters, friends, legacy patrons. I know it's been tough haul for everybody with the economic conditions being as messy as it is, but everybody who has been able to stick with us all of the time, I fully appreciate it, and it's much appreciated here. So let us put a blurb on our Rocks for There Volume 1. That's our final plug for the show. Tick tock, come on. Come on, video. Come on, come on. Right, won't you pull up? Come on. Suddenly we balky on the little viewer. Come on. Where are you? I don't know why that is not pulling up. Yeah, interesting. Waiting a moment. Sorry for the dead silence. Okay, there we go. Got our picture up. Now over to screen share. And away we go. And let us fire away. Advert for Volume 1. And there was our cute little advert. And next week, of course, will be another Casey Luskin week. And everybody stay uber safe about things. The Iran war that is all over except for the fact that Trump can't figure out how to end it. Is going to be cascading problems on oil shortages and fertilizer shortages and condom shortages and all sorts of things that are going to be cascading through our economy and the European, the Chinese. The Chinese get most of their imported oil through the Hormuz. Uh, mess, up and down and in and out. And doodly idiot Trump, who can blunder into things, and he's hoping that somehow or other he can blunder back out. We're going to be facing the consequences of all of that stuff. And so it's going to be producing even more unsettled times. And everybody hunker down, stay careful, watch out about the laser wielding penguins and any other problems, bad weather and icky things and ice and yipes. Anyway, stay safe, hunker down, and we will see you kids all next week and proceed through our exciting year of 2026. Eek. Well, ending the stream next week, we will be seeing more examples of why creationists have not persuaded anybody.